Google's Brainlock. Today I'm joined with Paul Truscott, and we're going to be talking about something I've never even heard of to do with Google business profiles, local map rankings. So, Paul, let's get straight into it.
Yeah.
What is Google's Brainlock?
Okay, so Brainlock is essentially the system that Google uses for everything to do with geolocation, geospatiality, and just geotopicality in general. So the LOC in the lock part stands for location, but that's what they've called it. It's Brainlock, and that's essentially what deals with all of this. So we're going to talk about how important that is, primarily for maps, but I'm going to touch on web pages too, because it's important for people to know when they're overdoing it with location pages, for example. Because I see a lot of people creating location pages that will just cannibalize each other, and it's because they're putting them up for the wrong places. So we'll touch on that. So essentially, Brainlock, it's absolutely vital what that whole system does if you're in the local space, whether you're, well, essentially if you're maps, but even if you're just producing web pages for local. And if you're doing both, which you should be doing both, then it has a compound effect. I'll deal with the web pages first because that's probably the easiest to deal with, and then I'll let the cat out of the bag on the GMB side of it. So with regard to the web pages, a lot of people don't realize that Google uses a geosystem where it creates a centroid for a location and a boundary. Okay, so there's a geo boundary. If you go to Google Maps, for example, and you type in a city name, you'll see that when the city comes up, it's got a little red dotted line around it, right? And sometimes you might be surprised that the city looks much smaller than you thought it was, especially in places like America. And this is because America has a lot of incorporated cities that we would call suburbs, but they're actually incorporated areas in their own right. Okay, so I'll touch on how Google deals with them and why it's different. So when you see that area, that is kind of the boundary for any given SERP usually. Sometimes they do expand them, depends on obviously the size of the location. So if you've got a small town, Google might put a boundary around that, but there might be some small villages and things around that town that will be included in the same SERP, even though they're not inside the city centre. That's just for, reasons of economy by Google, I guess. But it's worth checking those manually before you start building pages. So essentially where the problem comes with a lot of people with this geotopicality and geospatiality is not understanding where the boundary is for them. So if you check that boundary, you want to make sure that if you're generating 2 pages, let's say you generate 2 pages for 2 places within that same city boundary, they're probably going to cannibalize one another because they're the same SERP.
So, I want to stop you on that a minute before you kind of expand. So, with Google's Brainlock, I've seen it where if you was to put, let's say, Manchester, and it'll do the red dotted
Yeah.
line around it. But inside of that red dotted line, there might be certain areas like Rochdale and Oldham. And if you was to search individually, let's say for Oldham would still show up with a dotted line. It
Yes.
might still be within
Yeah.
a bigger city of
You're
Manchester.
right. Certain size cities in the UK, for example, it's London, Manchester, and Birmingham. They all have sub-SERPs,
Right, okay.
right? So they will be done by suburb. New York in America, for example, is done by borough. So the big cities, they will subdivide them and give individual places their own SERP.
Yeah,
If you went to somewhere like Coventry, that's a single SERP. It doesn't
yeah.
matter where you are inside that area. Kansas City would be the same in America, for example, although Kansas City is an odd one because there's 2 kind of sides to Kansas City. One's in Missouri, one's in Kansas, so probably a bad example. But most American cities that are not huge will have one single SERP, but they will often have a lot of other cities, whereas we would have suburbs, they have other cities.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing, but you're right. Even a suburb, if you choose it, Google will put a red dotted line around it to denote where the suburb ends.
Yeah.
But if you start building, if you built lots of suburb pages, now they might get traffic for if people were searching for the individual suburb, but generally they don't. But if people are searching at a city level and you've created those two suburb pages, they're probably going to cannibalize at that city level because they're both in the same SERP. They're both part of the same city. So people need to be aware of that. And also it's just useful to understand that's how it works. For like, if you're trying to create a bunch of pages to rank across a whole country, then subdividing it the way Google does is the way to go, because that's how Google is looking at it. That's how they're processing it. Like I've said before, always look to the teacher who's going to mark your homework to get the information. So always look at Google. It's amazing what you can find from the SERP, the information that's available on that SERP, just from looking at it. And a map SERP is a good example, or just going to a map itself and clicking in, putting in the name of the place is going to tell you what the size of the place is and the boundary of it. And then if you click on Get Directions, it'll put the centroid in, so you know where the center of the city is. It isn't always in the center either, sometimes it's not, but it'll show you the centroid of the city. And I'll come on to in a moment why that's crucially important for maps, not so much for pages. So yeah, so that's all of that system is part of Brainlock system, that it is computing all of these things. It looks at the content on your page and makes a decision about where that content is supposed to rank, and then it'll start assigning weights and values to the signals that you're giving it.
So if you was to enter a new country, let's say you've never done any local SEO in, let's say, Spain as being an example, and someone came to you and says, Paul Truscott, I need you, you're the legend of local SEO, I need you to come along and do me some local pages in Spain. Are you using Google's Brainlock to decide which pages to open up with a location page? And if so, how do you get Google's Brainlock? How do you get that information?
Okay, well, it's all, so well, you're using Google's Brainlock in the sense that you're using Google to get the information, and it's Google's Brainlock that's dealing with all that.
Yeah.
But it's quite simple to do. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's easy to do. So what you would do is you would install something like a Chrome extension like GS Location Changer, or any location changer that you can find. You can do this on a mobile phone. It's actually easier on a mobile phone to do it with something like, what's the one I use? I can't even remember the name of it now. But any kind of location changer, it doesn't matter. And then what you do, you find out where the city boundary is for that city that you want to rank in. Change your location to one side of it, and then do a near me search. Right, just do a near me search. Say gutter clean near me, whatever it is you want to rank for. Then go to the other side of the city. Open another page. Keep that page open on your desk. If it's your desktop, keep that page open. Open up another tab. Now change the location. Make sure you don't delete the original page, because it'll just give you a different result because you've changed location. So change location now. Do another search from the other side of the city, and see what SERP you get. If you get the same SERP, then that city's one SERP. If you get a different SERP, sometimes there might be one entry that's reversed. That's just a time thing. Or it could be a server thing. It's nothing to do with the SERP. But if you get a completely different SERP, like if there's 3 pages in there that weren't there before, then that's a different SERP. And then you've got to say, okay, so they've subdivided that city into smaller SERPs. So then you go about finding out how have they done that. Usually they do it at a suburb level. That's how they've done it, say, for Manchester and Birmingham, and London is done at borough level. So that's how they break them down. So that's how you find out what is a single SERP. Otherwise, you're wasting time building more pages than you need to, for one thing, and also risk of cannibalization with those pages. So that stops you from doing that. It's a bit laborious, but once you've done that research once, let's say you're going to cover 20 niches. If you're someone like you who's in like about a gazillion different niches, you only have to do that once, because if they've got that location's going to be the same. It's going to be a single SERP for everything, or it's going to be a multi-SERP for everything. It's not going to change depending on the category.
Yeah.
So it's only information you have to gather one time. But flipping, any more questions on that? If you have, I'll answer those if I can.
No, so from a web page, from a local SEO point of view, I get it now with regards to checking out the Brainlock kind of geofence of where it is and stuff.
Yeah.
What about them for Google business profiles?
Google business profiles, it gets really interesting, right? Because again, this is not something Google have ever. This wasn't in the leak, so it's not something that Google have ever publicly announced. But I've done a lot of testing on this. Basically, how Google assesses the geolocation or the centroid of a city. We know we've already discovered how it assesses the boundary. Okay, so all this is all Brainlock doing this. But the centroid of the city is essentially just one pair of coordinates, a single pair. Okay, across any big city, there's going to be literally billions of pairs of coordinates, but the centroid is just one single pair. And how you find it, as I said, you go to Maps, you Google the city, then click Get Directions, and that'll put a pin in there. That's the center of the city. Get those geocoordinates, that's the centroid. That is essentially what Google determines to be the city, the entity. Right, so if we're talking about Manchester, that pair of geocoordinates that denote Manchester, that is the pair of geocoordinates for that entity. And the further you get away from that entity, the less relevant you are. Or the further you get away from that pair of geocoordinates, the less relevant you are to that entity. So why this is important for ranking? If you're trying to rank for keyword plus city terms, which a lot of home service type businesses do, the closer you are located to that city centre, the easier it is to rank for any keyword containing the city name. Right? So the further you get away from it, the converse.
So with regards to that, could I then start uploading, let's say, images and put the longitude and latitude coordinates specifically for the centroid, and that's going to give me better chances, or starting doing things literally from that centroid outwards?
Not if you're not located there. It will help.
Yeah.
It will help, but location trumps everything. So if you're, for example, if somebody wants to refer back to one of the other podcasts we've done, there we talked about geotopicality and we touched on the SABs. They can refer to that as to how you might deal with this. But it's all done by location. So the closer you are located, so in other words, it's nodes and edges again, James. If we take the node of the city centroid and the node of our centroid, the shorter that edge is, the closer they are together spatially, the more relevant they are to one another.
Yeah.
Right. So the further you move away geographically from that pair of geocoordinates that denote the city, the less relevant you are. So why this matters is if you're located close, you need far fewer reviews to rank. You need far less content to rank. You need far less domain authority to rank. Now you can be outranked. Like you could locate yourself right on the doorstep of the centroid and find another GMB still outranking you, but that's to do with their prominence. But you can overcome so much of that by just being there. So I would even suggest, if you're a new business, say you've got a workshop and you're on the other side of town, if you could get a serviced office very, very close, there are black hat ways to do it too, but we're not going to go down that road. But if you could get a service office very close to that city centroid and locate your business there, as far as Google are concerned, you're going to have a much, much easier time of ranking than you will if you're further away. But that's just for city plus, for keyword plus city terms. It's where somebody names the city centroid. So in other words, they've said, to Google, the signal to Google from the user is, I want a service that is close to that city. And because you as a person just thinks of Manchester as the whole place, but Google thinks of Manchester as that single pair of coordinates. So they'll look at that and go, you want a business that's close to that dot, and they'll serve it up.
So what about if I was around the outside of Manchester and I was just to put plumbers near me? Does that go back to the centroid because it knows I'm inside the geo fence of Manchester, or will it do it as where I am, the coordinates of where I am?
That one is done based on where the searcher is located.
Right.
So if it's a near me search, they are now the centroid rather than the city. So if they're putting in skip hire Manchester, Manchester is the centroid of the search. If they're putting in skip hire near me, they are the centroid of the search.
Yeah.
And it's all to do with geospatiality. So how far away are you from that centroid? So if the centroid is the person, it depends how far away your business is from them. That's why when we talked about the SABs, it's important to locate yourself virtually, locate yourself where most of the phone calls are going to come from, most of the searches are going to come from.
Well, that random one, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here. What happens if I was to actually type in plumbers near me in Manchester? What happens then, or do you not know?
Good question. I think I've not done it. It'd be interesting. Guess what I'm going to do as soon as we finish this podcast? I think they'll probably look at the first part of the query and give it most weight.
Yeah.
I would think. Because they would look at that, I'm thinking, and say, okay, you're looking for a plumber near you in Manchester. Yes, I can see you're located in Manchester.
Right, okay, yeah.
And serve up. That's my guess, but I'm going to test it and see. And then I'll let you know. But yeah, that would be my thought on that.
Well, Paul Truscott, it's been an absolute legend in having you on. Anyone who didn't know about Google's Brainlock, I'm in local SEO and have been for over 15 years, and I'd never even heard of the term. So we hope you like the knowledge shared from Paul about Google's Brainlock. Leave a comment in the comment section. Can you expand on anything that Paul said? Is there any other questions that you want me to ask him and do a follow-on maybe episode? Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Likewise, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks a lot for having me. Cheers now.